Story 1. There was over $100 in cash in my child's toy cash register that he saved over birthdays and Christmases throughout his life. Then, there was $20 missing. I was aware she had a tendency to take things that did not belong to her, but I never expected her to stoop so low. She denies doing it, which makes the situation worse. There is no chance he spent that money. Story 2. I was helping a friend process some serious grief after losing a parent, and she said we sounded weak. I ended our relationship that night. I'm glad my friends feel safe to discuss our feelings, and had I known how much she resented that, I would have never dated her in the first place. Story 3. I don't know how to describe it adequately, but in my marriage, there was a very strong feeling of nothing I do satisfies her. For example, my ex-wife and I were renovating our house. She explained exactly the type of tile she wanted. She found a tile that she absolutely loved. We went to buy it and she said she loved it. I purposely kept quiet to ensure she liked it first because she had a habit of not liking anything I liked. After we bought it and she expressed her love for it, I told her I loved it too. However, it took her about 5 minutes to find all the flaws with the tile. She now hated it and we had to rent the truck we just returned to go back and return the tile. This type of situation would happen multiple times a day: what we wanted for dinner, the outfits she wore, TV shows, you name it, and she would change her mind if I had a positive opinion about it. I swear she thrived on making me miserable. Never again. Took me too long to realize it, but never again. Story 4. She was on vacation. 2 days before she returned, I found out my oldest friend had died. It didn't hit me at first, and by the time I went to pick her up from the airport, it was Valentine's Day morning. I did what I could: flowers, breakfast, but I was borderline despondent. Feeling guilty, I asked her if we could postpone our Valentine's Day celebration until at least tomorrow because I wanted to do something nicer for her. But I was simply too depressed. Instead of understanding, she said it was another example of her not being able to rely on me. After 4 years, I knew in that moment she wasn't the one, but she was still the one to break up with me on Valentine's Day. A month after we broke up, I found out that she cheated on me during her vacation. Still hurts, but it's safe to say my instincts were right. Story 5. There were a few red flags before this, but one night I was visiting her. We were in a long-distance relationship, and she had friends over for dinner. We had plans to go to an event together. She asked me to pick something up, and I asked to borrow her car to make it quicker. She replied that going on foot was fine, stating there was lots of time. I walked for about 20 minutes to shop for the item, and when I texted that I was at the checkout, she asked me to grab something else too. I got out of line, grabbed the additional item, and texted that I was at the checkout again. She then sent another request. Finally, I left the store, and she asked me to pick up some wine. I grabbed the wine and rushed home, only to be greeted with a snarl. "Where were you? How dare you leave me with all the work? Who do you think you are?" It was a real enraged attack. I didn't argue back and stayed for dinner, but when it was time for all of us to go out, I declined. She took me aside to tell me I was embarrassing her, and while they were out, I packed my things and left. Story 6. Canceled plans we had made multiple times. We were in a long-distance relationship a few hours apart at the time. She asked me if I wanted to house sit with her at her brother's place on the coast. I said that sounded good. She had a wealthy family, and some of their homes were beautiful and in great locations. I had been to a couple of them. I took a week off work to go with her, but then she canceled those plans with an excuse pretty close to that week. I suggested we go somewhere else, and she agreed. At the last minute, she canceled that plan with another excuse. I thought about it, had enough of the situation, and tried to reach her to end it. She wouldn't pick up or answer messages. She knew what was happening, so I just moved on. About a year later, she contacted me out of the blue. I told her I had met my now wife and was seeing her. She didn't say much after that, and I never heard from her again. Story 7. A few nights ago, she cornered me in the kitchen, getting right up in my face and screaming over something. While it's understandable to lose one's temper, she insists afterward that she did nothing wrong and that I made her act that way. To me, this behavior is abusive, or at least a precursor to it. I think I'm done. Story 8. She insulted my mother during an argument she initiated. My mother recently passed away, and she was aware of that. I asked her to leave my apartment. Story 9. My ex gave me a lot of grief for not providing more for her. I supported us while I went through college. She worked, but it was a big deal for me to help with bills, and she never contributed to rent. When I graduated and got a good job, she expected a $20,000 ring and a house. We lived in a very high cost of living area. Even with my good job, I couldn't afford it and was just starting out. Her parents didn't like that. Her father thought I was scared to commit and didn't want the responsibility of being a homeowner. I got a condo as a compromise because she couldn't live in an apartment again. She reluctantly agreed but would make snarky comments about it. I finally had enough when she claimed I was having an attitude with her parents. I ended the relationship. Over the next couple of months, she sent me texts and letters saying that it was okay to come back and that she forgave me. The breaking point was when she wrote a letter claiming to have talked to my late mother through a medium whom she never met. She said that my mother was trying to absorb my negative energy and was upset that we had split. Shortly thereafter, I blocked her on everything and went to the courthouse for harassment. She didn't get convicted but still sends me messages from time to time. It has been a year and a half since I ended it. You don't talk about what my mother would have wanted for me. Story 10. Stealing my ID and debit card while I was asleep and attempting to use them to break into my workplace was the moment I realized I needed to leave. I did not feel safe discussing it with her. So, I spent a few months quietly planning my escape. The other moment that confirmed my decision was her rapid fluctuations between being apologetic and nearly violently angry when I refused to assist her in committing insurance fraud. She claimed to have seen signs that she was supposed to do it. Story 11. My ex-wife threatened to kill my cat. I had tolerated many horrible things she did to me, but when she threatened my pet, it became absolutely intolerable. For years later, that cat is still with me, luckily. Story 12. Looking back now, hitting me in the face should have been a turning point. After we broke up, she scratched her nails down my face and said, "I am going to tell the police who tried to assault me." Story 13. Apparently, it was the 167th time she treated me poorly. Fool me once, shame on me, but I probably shouldn't have let myself be treated like that for years. I'm not bitter. Story 14. My ex from a long time ago verbally and emotionally abused me regularly. I have thick skin, so I rolled with the punches. One day, I came home to find her screaming at my dog in a corner. He had a terrified look on his face because he moved one of her shoes. I grabbed my dog and, on the way out the door, told her to gather her belongings and be gone by the time I returned, or I would call the police for trespassing. Do what you want to me, but never mess with my dog. Story 15. I was burglarized and felt unsafe in my apartment. I asked my girlfriend if she could stay over or if I could stay at her place due to my discomfort. Instead, she went out drinking and clubbing with her friends. I broke up with her 2 days later. Story 16. When our sex life, which had been great for years, suddenly declined around the same time her personality changed, she became uninterested in spending time together or conversing, as we always had in our relationship. That was all it took for me. After I left her, it became clear that I was correct. She had been talking to another guy whom she began dating shortly after our separation. Story 17. Me. Relationships are about compromise. Her. No, they're not. And that was the moment I fell out of love with her. Story 18. She was psychologically abusive to our son from a young age. We had given him a robotic talking parrot that would record and play back whatever you said to it. One day, in a fit of anger, she picked up his parrot in front of him and smashed it into pieces on the floor. She also mocks his friends with racial mimicking to this day. He is now 22 years old. Story 19. Being taken advantage of, specifically in a financial manner. I don't mind paying for something nice occasionally, or taking a larger share of the living expenses because I happen to earn a bit more. But when rent was raised and she assumed I would start paying the full difference, or when I noticed her paycheck was still referred to as her money, while my paycheck was being called our money, that was when I had to draw the line. Story 20. He asked me what word I hated to be called more than anything in the world. I told him I didn't want to share because it really hurt, and I preferred no one knew. He insisted that I could trust him. During the next argument, guess what the first word he called me was? He said it with a smirk, too. Story 21. I provided her with thoughtful service, such as daily hot drinks, constant cooking, baths with candles, and weekly massages. Despite this, she never returned the favor or offered anything for 6 months. When I asked, I received a false promise. I politely requested a plain black coffee when she had the time, but I was shouted at. So I decided to leave. Story 22. They tell me they wish I were dead, attack me, and throw things at me. They often leave physically during arguments and then say things like I deserved it or rationalize their actions, to the point where I began to believe I was the problem. Story 23. My first wife always had wants. She wanted a new car, so I bought her the one she desired. Before it was a year old, she didn't like it anymore. She wanted a house, and we bought one, but it was never good enough no matter how much I worked on it. She wanted a dog, so we adopted one, but she never paid any attention to it. It became my dog. She never kept a job longer than a year before she hated it and would quit. Every time she got a new job, she had to have a new wardrobe. She would leave to find herself, be gone a couple of weeks, then decide she still loved me and wanted to make it work. Like a fool, I took her back. She wanted to have a child, so we did. I worked the night shift while she worked a regular day job. I took care of our daughter in the morning and afternoon until I had to go to work. I dropped her off at daycare on my way. The daycare was open until 7 p.m., and I started work at 3:30 p.m. Several times, I would get called at work that my wife had not picked up our daughter, and the daycare was closed. I had to leave work to pick up our daughter and take her home. My wife would show up later and say she was having drinks with work friends and lost track of time. Eventually, she left me and our daughter to find herself again. I told her to be sure to pack all her belongings because she wasn't coming back again. I had enough of her behavior. With the help of my family and friends, I was raising my daughter and divorcing my wife. After she was served the divorce papers, she tried to come back home, saying how much she missed me and our daughter. I just ignored her. I found out that she had to sell her newer car for an older one just to make ends meet. I finalized the divorce and had her pay child support. It was only $50 a month, but she still never paid it. Some people can never be happy with what they have. Story 24. I felt like my ex-wife had unrealistic and ever-increasing expectations of me. It was as if I were chained to a treadmill that she controlled, constantly increasing the speed and incline. I felt exhausted trying to please her. I also felt like I was walking on eggshells around her, never knowing when she would have an outburst. It turned out she has borderline personality disorder, which I discovered while attending therapy during my long and costly divorce process. After my ex-wife, my ex-girlfriend crossed the line into emotional abuse toward my biological children, for whom I have custody. I had to take measures to have her removed, as she would not leave voluntarily. Story 25. She told me she was thinking about committing suicide after work that day, while I was 200 miles away, as we were in a long-distance relationship at that point. She then became unreachable by any means and got angry at me for freaking out and calling the police, which embarrassed her. Sometime later, she told me she regretted not having gone ahead and done it. At that stage, I concluded that her approach to the relationship had mostly become about manipulating my emotions, so I felt the need to end it and go no contact for a while. It was difficult. Story 26. When I was a teenager, I thought I could never be with someone who didn't like the rain. Fast forward, and I'm happily married to a wonderful woman who strongly dislikes the rain. That was a poor criterion, teenage me. Story 27. Stealing my Super Nintendo and games and trading them for marijuana. I had Final Fantasy IV, Final Fantasy VI, Earthbound, and Chrono Trigger. Story 28. My ex definitely crossed a line when she betrayed me. She literally stabbed me with a knife and went to jail. This was a huge red flag. Story 29. I got involved in a Facebook argument with an ex. She found my work's human resources email address and forwarded the argument. asking if this was the kind of person they wanted working for them. Fortunately, I still am. Story 30. Being unfaithful is unacceptable. I do not have time for that and am unwilling to tolerate it at any level. Additionally, I will not accept accusations of such behavior for any trivial reason. Story 31. She wanted me to put all my mother's property under her name and have my uncle marry her already married sister, so she could obtain a green card. Story 32. The breakup game involves people saying they want to end a relationship due to bad moods or other reasons, then acting as if nothing happened the next day. I have zero patience for that kind of love. I even told one person at the start that I was coming out of a relationship where this behavior occurred, and she assured me she would never act that way. Fast forward a few months, and she was doing it. So I held her to her word. All these texts and phone calls about how she is so sad. Well, how do you think I felt when you said we were done? It makes no sense. Goodbye. Story 33. Everything I did was wrong. I dusted but didn't put the knickknacks back exactly right. I didn't put the dishes away correctly. Nothing I said was right. I apparently used my fork and knife incorrectly. For 5 years, she made me feel like I couldn't do a single thing right. It took years of therapy to get past that. Criticism is acceptable, but I won't be made to feel that way again. Story 34. Being a cheater and jealous is difficult to handle. If I know in advance that someone is promiscuous and cannot be with one person, I can accept that. However, lying about their infidelity while being jealous and suspicious of everything I do is too much hypocrisy to tolerate. Story 35. Being unwilling to communicate for more than a brief period is essentially giving me the silent treatment. This behavior is very manipulative. Story 36. She never initiated intimacy. She enjoyed it and we engaged in it pretty much whenever I was in the mood, but there was never a moment when she gave me a look, hinted with a touch, or really showed any interest. When I brought it up, she would shrug it off and say it wasn't her thing, which was fine, but it allowed doubt to creep in that her attraction was never for me, but for the life I provided, which ended up being the case. It got to a point where I stopped initiating or even paying her attention, and rather than being upset, she seemed even happier. That was a clear sign that what she loved about our relationship was the nice house, the safe financial standing, and the freedom to do whatever she wanted. She never cheated on me, but she also never loved me. The breakup was tough, but mostly because I was heartbroken and she was just disappointed. Story 37. My ex-wife tried to kick and punch me due to a petty argument. I immediately asked her to leave my house and filed for divorce a few days later. We are actually good friends now, and I'm on good terms with her family. I maintain a zero-tolerance policy for any kind of physical violence that does not involve protecting yourself or another person from immediate harm. Story 38. My ex-fiancé and I ended our relationship about 3 months ago. Our relationship had been struggling for a while before that. One moment that has stuck with me is when I once cried in front of her because I felt very overwhelmed. I guess I am sensitive for a guy. She told me that she felt like the man in our relationship and I was the woman. Still feels awful. Story 39. Talking to her ex-boyfriend after she had said negative things about him to me. She claimed she had blocked him. However, she started talking to him and another ex again. When I expressed my discomfort, we argued, and she brought up my father, who had passed away not long before that. I decided to end the conversation, and we haven't spoken in about a year. Story 40. Mostly, it was when I opened up to her about things from my past that are causing me anxiety today. She talked about it with her sisters and a friend. I felt really betrayed by that, and now I am a little guarded about what I say to her. Story 41. I must say that her bringing up my speech impediment during an argument has not improved our relationship. Story 42. She insisted I say her memory is completely accurate, even if I don't remember events happening the same way. Apparently, I was accused of manipulating her perception and being unsafe for having researched memory extensively prior to the relationship, for a book I was writing on the subject, and for bringing that understanding into our relationship. Story 43. Cheating. Unfortunately, nearly all of my exes, except for my last one, have done so. I started dating late because I considered myself unattractive, which has caused some damage. Every ex who cheated has tried to come back after a while, but I absolutely refuse. I do not respond with "I miss you too" when I receive those messages. No matter how lonely I feel, cheating is something I can forgive in time, but I will not make the same mistake twice. No matter how much they claim to have changed, it won't fix what was broken. Story 44. Should have been released due to the situation against me, but I foolishly let her come back. The second time she got locked up was enough. Story 45. My ex-girlfriend cheated on me. I found out through mutual friends and was completely devastated. I confronted her and ended the relationship as soon as I learned the truth. She was stunned. I moved on and haven't looked back since. Story 46. My ex-wife was abusive in many ways I never thought possible, alongside being a pathological liar to make me stay. After dealing with it for years, I finally had a moment where I said, "I'm done. This is it." I told her, while deployed, that when I returned home, we needed to seriously discuss our marriage. While I was overseas, she acted as though I didn't exist except to use my paycheck. I warned her that one more lie or deception, and I would walk away and never return. I called frequently to let my young children know I would be home soon, but received no response. After returning to the States, I arrived home only to find no one there to welcome me. I noticed a rundown vehicle in my driveway and entered my house. It was early afternoon at this point. Climbing the stairs to a quiet house, I found her and another man in my bed. At that moment, I knew I had a decision to make as my hand reached for my sidearm while I started to drop my rucksack. Thank God I had an epiphany where my rage and hurt made way for clearer thoughts about my children. I grabbed another bag while they slept, collected clothing and important documents, returned to the room, and kicked the bed, causing her to stir and lose all color in her face. I told her, stupidly I might add, to keep the house and leave me alone, along with some choice words. I never returned, but she made my life difficult, dragging our divorce out for almost 2 years. Not because she loved me, but because she couldn't stand the thought of losing her financial support and used my kids as weapons against me. Thankfully, I have a great relationship with my son and daughter. They know that their dad loved them and would do anything to see them happy and successful in life. They are now 19 and 18, both serving in the Marine Corps, and I couldn't be prouder. Sorry for the lengthy explanation, but that is my line in the sand. Story 47. My experience mostly revolves around a difficult situation that involved an attempted murder. My ex-wife and I genuinely loved each other for about a decade, but unfortunately, she began to develop severe mental health issues, leading her to have paranoid delusions. She believed I was running a cult that killed women by giving them true orgasms before enslaving them in the afterlife. I managed to cope with her frequent catatonic states and the need to ensure she didn't harm herself. I endured her random bouts of paranoia when she would speak like a child and accuse me of trying to poison her. I even tolerated her violent episodes, where her body would tense up, making her look and act like a skeletal figure intent on harming me. This continued even when I had to call emergency services because I couldn't defend myself in those moments. We exchanged Buddhist vows that did not include the traditional "till death do us part" phrase, but I sincerely believed in supporting her through sickness and in health. My breaking point came one day when someone knocked on our door. She put on a shirt but forgot to wear any panties or pants and went outside to speak to the man. Realizing she was having an episode, I asked her to come inside. Since I had reached my limit, I requested that she stay in the bedroom for a while, where she usually spent most of her time, so I could feel safe until the episode passed. I walked her into the room and closed the door behind me. A few minutes later, I heard her shouting for help, so I returned and found that she had tried to jump out the window, naked, headfirst, into a thorny bush approximately 8 feet below. I helped her back inside, but she immediately began scratching my face. Unable to tolerate her behavior any longer, I gripped her wrists to protect myself, pushed her onto the bed, and shouted that she needed to either stay in the bedroom or leave the house. I then asked a mutual friend to pick her up and take her to her father's home. Foolishly, I thought some distance would help her calm down and intended to pick her up in a few days. During our separate time, we communicated and discussed what it would take for us to be together again. I told her she needed to resume her medication, and she insisted I had to admit that every time she attacked me, it was actually me attacking her and that I had faked all the video and audio recordings made by us or the emergency services. At that moment, I realized she was so unwell that even outside of an episode, she believed I had coordinated with the police to fabricate recordings. I found it impossible to comply with her demands. Truth had become very important to me during my childhood, and I couldn't lie to improve our relationship. We separated, but unfortunately, that was not the end. About 3 weeks later, I discovered that before she left, she had cut our phone lines for some reason. During this time, a bodybuilder Marine, whom she had convinced to kill me, showed up, and there was no way to contact the police. I survived only because my dog, who had previously been fearful and hid behind my legs, sensed my fear and acted to protect me. He somehow broke through our front door while the Marine was trying to break it down to chase him and bit the intruder's leg. Naturally, there were legal issues following this incident, and she continued to stalk me for a long time while going in and out of inpatient mental health care. Over time, however, I was able to find happiness again, even being truly happy on my own. Sadly, my dog passed away last year, but he lived a happy life without the worry of my ex-wife's mental health episodes, enjoying his time as a puppy into old age. In summary, my line in the sand was far too late, occurring when she insisted I confess to coordinating with the police to fake emergency calls and convincing someone to attempt to kill me. Story 48. On a double date, I said I hate mushrooms. She laughed and said, "No, you don't. You love mushrooms." I assured her I hate mushrooms, but she insisted I loved them. I never spoke to her again after that. Story 49. My friend apologized to her about a comment he made a year and a half prior, while we were out for his birthday. We were all having a conversation at the bar at 2 a.m. asking, "What kind of chip would you be?" She asked, "What kind would I be?" He jokingly replied, "I don't know, one of those barbecue chips or something." That's our friend group's humor. She lost it on him. It made no sense. He apologized multiple times throughout the year. We were out, and he was face-to-face apologizing again. This guy rarely apologizes, and what he said was a heartfelt apology over that situation. I didn't ask him to apologize. He did it because he wanted us all to be cool again and hang out together without awkward tension. Then my ex looked at him and said, "No, I don't like you, and I'll probably never like you. I'm not going to forgive you." There was more to it, but it was rude and condescending. When I tell you my jaw dropped, I immediately apologized to him and said, "We're leaving. You better follow me if you want to ride." To my ex, we got in the car and I told her, "I don't know who you think you are, but do not talk to my friends that way. I don't even talk to people I dislike that way. That was the rudest thing I've ever seen in my life. I'd never speak to your friends like that. It was a joke about a potato chip. Get over it." He went out of his way to apologize to you about it multiple times, and I didn't even ask him to do that. I respect people and will tolerate them, but my friends have been in my life for 15 years. That caused me to snap. Never attack the people I love. They've been around a lot longer than you. I am who I am because of these people. Never disrespect family or friends. If it's warranted, I understand, but that was insane to me. Story 50. Abandoning me and then returning a few days later only to abandon me again and pretend to commit suicide. Story 51. My ex-wife, who had the same advisor in the PhD program, had a threesome with someone else who served on both of our PhD committees. Anthropologists are open-minded, but there's a limit. Story 52. My ex told me about my daughter. I moved out the next week and didn't look back. 9 months after moving out, I received an email detailing over $17,000 in expenses I owed her while living with her, and for the weekends my daughter stayed with us. My life has been amazing ever since. Phew. Story 53. She wanted me to lie to her friends and family about her serious drinking problem. I thought this girl was too good to be true. Story 54. My ex began a relationship with a friend of mine, then invited me to her apartment while he was there and pretended they were just hanging out as friends. I slept in her bed that night and he slept on the couch. but I could smell his hair on my pillow from the night before. Story 55. Daily contact and weekly meetings with her baby's father, with whom she was supposed to have split up. When we first dated, they still lived together. Whenever I set boundaries, she accused me of being jealous and claimed it was for the sake of the baby. They would call and video chat while I was in the room and spend holidays like Halloween together. Eventually, I learned he had been sending desperate texts trying to win her back, which she waited weeks to tell me about. In the end, she broke up with me over text without giving any reason. When I demanded an explanation, she asked if it mattered. Surprise, she got back with her ex shortly after. It was all a game to manipulate me. Story 56. I had an ex who used intimacy as a tool against me. If I didn't comply with her wishes, she would threaten to withhold intimacy. She did this 3 times, and that's when I decided to end the relationship. She was devastated, but I would not tolerate that behavior. That was probably 15 years ago. I have been happily married to someone else for about 10 years now. Story 57. It's interesting. It happened to me today. We're split and have a daughter, so I came back from our daughter's swimming lesson to a barrage of obstacles. She blocked my way to getting my belongings, and while I was retrieving them, she took the car keys out of the door and went upstairs to hide them. This left me with no choice but to talk to her. Manipulative abuse is truly remarkable, isn't it? Story 58. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was being criticized for my interests. It wasn't the playful teasing of being a nerd or a big fan, which I can accept. Instead, it was outright hostility toward my interests every time something related came up. There were constant questions about how anyone could like it, claims that it was the absolute worst and not worth anyone's time. It reminded me of how my ex reacted to Star Wars while we were dating during the release of the sequel trilogy. Story 59. I'm happily married now, but the girl I thought was the one cheated on me. I showed up at her apartment, and she was with another person. Story 60. In the heat of an argument regarding a parenting disagreement, she said, "You're not a good father." I believe that was the only time words hurt me at a core level. That day, I found my limit. We discussed the situation later, and it turns out she meant I wasn't being a good father in that instance, but those words did not come together in her mind at that time. Story 61. I am not an adult yet, so my relationships have not been high stakes. It seems less intense compared to other experiences. A guy I went out with a few times always grabbed me really hard, even when I wasn't trying to move away from him. The last time I saw him, I was trying to get out of his car, and he grabbed my arm so tightly that I had bruises. I had to bite him to get him to let go of me. Story 62. Gaslighting narcissists trying to manipulate me, taking things I say out of context and making me feel bad or guilty about being depressed. She crossed the line a few times, but the final straw was when she came over one night to stay and told me she had sex with her ex, framing it as if he had raped her, which he didn't. She wanted him to impregnate her so their 5-year-old son could have a legitimate sibling. That was some deeply disturbing behavior, and I kicked her out in anger. Story 63. 3 weeks ago, I caught her chatting inappropriately with a male coworker. Her defense was that it was friendly banter, that there was nothing sexual involved, and that they never engaged in any physical activity. Story 64. Trustworthiness. After I gave my wife a second chance to regain my trust, following her deception regarding an extended affair, she continued to undermine our relationship. She cyberstalked me in an anonymous online support community for survivors of infidelity and threatened suicide in front of our daughter, blaming her for the situation. Finally, she mocked my deepest vulnerabilities during the time she was supposed to be rebuilding my trust. This behavior was the final straw. I realized she was irredeemably untrustworthy. Story 65. She argued hatefully, and it happened too often. The world is full of people ready to cut at your branches. The last thing anyone needs is someone at home to undermine them at the root. I was really into her. She was super funny, and she started off beautiful. I found myself becoming more physically attracted to her the longer I knew her. That's the first and really only time that has ever happened to me. She was amazing, capable, funny, and incredibly smart. She was better than being alone when you felt like being alone. But that was all when she wasn't angry. When she got angry, she became truly nasty. It was as if she couldn't separate being angry at someone she loved from just raw hatred for someone she absolutely despised. For her, both feelings were the same. There seemed to be no levels of anger. It was all or nothing. Once she set her sights on you, she was determined to hurt you as much as she could, often over really petty issues. Once it started, there was nothing you could say or do to make it stop. Even complete submission would somehow annoy her even more. Eventually, I realized this would be my life, and I knew I couldn't condemn myself to it. It's been years now, embarrassingly long not to be over her. I still think about her a lot. The good times were as good as the bad times were bad. It was always either the best thing ever or the worst experience of my life. Never anything in between. Took me a long time to be okay after everything with her. It's like a Jekyll and Hyde situation where Jekyll is your soulmate and Hyde is someone you wish you'd never met. Story 66. Pop my pimples. I know this sounds ridiculous, but I specifically told her I didn't like it. It was disgusting. The pain made me irritable, and she deliberately ignored me and used me like her bubble wrap. Sounds absurd, but try dealing with this every day for over a year. Obviously, it wasn't just that. We broke up for a number of reasons. However, that was something that really bothered me. Story 67. Both my ex-wife and my ex-girlfriend crossed the line of infidelity. I made it clear that I do not approve of or will ever forgive cheating. Needless to say, they are exes for a reason. Story 68. She was a communist and often vocal about it, using phrases like, "That wasn't real communism." I do not share her beliefs but enjoy being around people who challenge me. We had been together for a few months when my friends hosted a party, and I thought it was time for her to meet them, so I invited her along. I made it clear that my best friend's family fled a communist regime and lost everything, so I asked her not to bring up politics. A couple of hours into the party, she was a bit tipsy but not completely drunk. While talking to my friend, whom I had introduced her to, she started discussing not real communism and claimed, "Your family is exaggerating or making things up." I took her outside and ended the relationship right then and there. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.